Howdy, I'm Jace. I have sex addiction and I work with a whole lot of other people who do too. But wait, is that a real thing? Yes, and it's probably not what you're thinking. It's exactly what we're going to be talking about in today's video. But before we go there, make sure to subscribe to this channel to ensure that we can continue putting out free resources for people who need them and to show your support. Now let's dive right in. Is sex addiction a real thing? Yes, it is. And it's not what we've thought of in society. Is there some addictive quality to semen? No. Is there something we're absorbing when we're in the act of sex or masturbation or watching pornography or participating in some voyeuristic or exhibitionist act? No. That's not what's going on with sex addiction, and that's not what's going on with any area of addiction. So what is and why does this fit in? Well, when we're talking about addiction, we are looking at a function or a misfunction of the brain. Is this a lack of willpower, loose morals, some kind of degenerates of society? No, come on, team. This is 2021. We have been studying addiction for decades. We actually get to look inside the brain now, which is really cool. This is not some kind of evil, elusive force that's taking over, and it is not the result of a shitty person, okay? I know that it can look that way because someone in active addiction does wildly insane things that don't make any sense, that are hurtful, that are harmful, that defy logic, and there's a reason for all of that. So are we going to be talking today about why we should excuse all of that behavior and let anyone with addiction off the hook? No, that's not what we're talking about. That's never what we're talking about. We're going to talk about what's going on in the brain and why that shows up with sexual behavior of a variety of styles, right? All right. So way back in the day, our brains evolved to have a motivation system to encourage us to continue behaviors that were linked to our survival. Yeah, but Jace, if we don't have sex, we're not going to die. True. However, it is linked to the survival of our species. So the brain decided to go ahead and just throw that in the mix as well to ensure we continued in behaviors that helped the survival of our species. Sex is deeply wired into that reward system. Now, what's going on in the reward system? The reward system is a function of the limbic system, which is our survival system, our fight or flight or freeze or please is the new one I've heard system. It is the oldest parts of the brain that takes over when we have a perceived threat to our survival. Now, that's important because we don't have the same threats that we used to, right? Like there's no saber-toothed tiger about to attack me right now. I do have a very snuggly dog, a couple of them, but they're more likely to come cuddle than to attack me, right? Irrelevant. So we're talking about perceived threats. Now, before we go into how sex plays into that with the brain and with addiction, we have to jump backwards. And this is a part that's really uncomfortable for a lot of people. And I think it's one of the core reasons that we are not dealing with this at all, this area of addiction, is because this stuff is actually starting in childhood almost 100% of the time. And I know we don't want to think about kids and sex together. We don't want to think about kids and addiction together. We certainly don't want to think about kids and sex addiction together. I sure don't. But here's the thing, team. I won't say 100%. I'll just leave a little margin of error space there, but I haven't come across anyone yet that doesn't have trauma in early life when we are looking at addiction and recovery for addiction. Now, we're going to go back to that perceived threat, right? Okay. Trauma can happen in really big ways, like in my case, being sexually abused for several years. That's traumatic when you're a child or at any age, but it can also show up in smaller ways as well. Really what we're talking about here is the perception of unsecure or unsafe situations from a child's point of view. Now, when we're kiddos, we are at the complete mercy of our caregivers. We are pretty useless for many, many years as far as survival goes when we're kids. So we're completely dependent on those around us. If there's instability, or perceptions of things being insecure or unsafe consistently over time, that also develops as trauma. Trauma is not an elusive thing either. What we're talking about is a different way that the brain is set up. And trauma actually really does alter the brain. And that's often where we get, you've heard of people being chemically imbalanced. That's what's going on, right? If we're in this consistent state of stress, which guess where that gets processed? The limbic system, yes. Our brain accommodates for that in our neurotransmitters, in our chemicals, and in other systems as well, but we're just gonna keep it simple and talk about the brain, right? So here, we're in this state of stress. We are in this survival mode as kids. When our brains are forming, now they're being formed in a different way, what we call the trauma brain, right? And we have a deficiency of these chemicals. And now here are these behaviors or substances that boost those chemicals that there is a deficiency in. And the brain goes, hey, yes, do that some more. And so the kid does, right? Is this initially sexual behavior? Not always, but sometimes yes, especially because sexual abuse is so common for people who have sex addiction. So now we have this thing that's the poison and the medicine, right? And we'll talk about that in another video because I know it doesn't make a lick of sense, but it is really, really common. Because does the brain go like, oh, you shouldn't be altering this chemical with pornography or with masturbation. You should do it with going out for a run or having a deep connected conversation with someone you trust. No, the brain goes, ooh, boosting chemical. Yes, cool, thank you. Continue doing that. Keep pushing that button. That's gonna boost that chemical. That's gonna result in that process to help balance out. That's what's happening in the brain. And for the person, it's a sense of feeling better, feeling good, because that's what the reward system is. It rewards us, so it feels good. Or it might just be feeling nothing at all, or be a complete numbing out or distraction, which is superior to the suffering that comes with trauma. Big trauma or little trauma, we're talking about kids, right? So now here we have this brain that has gotten all kerfuffled, and we're pushing that button and we link it to the survival system because that's how the brain's wired, and we haven't moved out of that yet, even though it's 2021, right? So now we have these behaviors that just push that button. That's honest to God, that's all that's happening when we're talking about addiction and sex addiction. So if there is a behavior that is having that result in the brain of the reward system, then that can turn into compulsion and can turn into addiction. That's because we get a cycle going where we have a perceived threat to our survival, whether it's real or not, it doesn't matter, the brain doesn't know. And so it goes, do that thing that links, that pushes that button that links to us being safe, right? And so we push the button and we survive, and we push the button and we survive, and we push the button and we survive, and we do this over and over and over and over, that then it starts happening backwards. Perceived threat, we're gonna die, you've got to do that thing that keeps us alive. It doesn't matter that that doesn't make any logical sense, that having sex or being on the apps or watching pornography isn't going to alter our survival. The brain doesn't know, and the part of the brain that is linked to understanding those things and long-term consequences and solid judgment and decision making, that process isn't working because of what has already happened in the brain that has altered the gray matter and the connections of the different hemispheres in the different parts of the brain, like to that prefrontal cortex. So that system of analyzing and logic, it's not online in the same way that it is with a healthy brain. That's why we end up doing these nutso things, because the judgment's not there. That's not a shitty person you're dealing with. I'm sorry, I know, believe me, I know it would be so much easier to just look at people as monsters. That's them. there's something wrong with them. That's a monster. Instead of looking at them as people, where it's all of us, right? We all have this capability. It's much easier to go, that's you, something's wrong with you. Well, unfortunately, that's not what's happening here. We can't just discount them, okay? We're talking about people who, and honestly, like, I know this sucks, like, believe me, I know this is not the news that most people want to hear. That person in your life, perhaps that's why you're watching this, who's doing harmful things, who appears to have loose morals and have no willpower and be a degenerate and just be showing up as a shitty person, they're very likely someone that as a child went through ongoing trauma that actually altered their brain so that they do not have a functional brain. They did whatever they could come up with as a child to help with that pain that's so extreme, we just have to do something to alter it so that we feel we can survive. And because of how the brain is functioning and because that chemical imbalance that's already in the mix, it turns into compulsion and it turns into addiction. And here they are in your life now acting foolish, right? Does that excuse it? No, but that's just what's happening. That just explains it. Now, I always say addiction is not our fault. Recovery is our responsibility. Those are different things. You're never going to hear me just say, hey, give them a free pass. They had a tough childhood. That's not what I'm talking about here. We're talking about science and what is actually going on with that person. So can sexual behavior, sexual content, pornography, masturbation, all of those things, infidelity, unfortunately, yes, be addiction? Yeah, they can. Not because there's some elusive addictive quality in them, but just because of how they function in the brain. And yes, sex is tied into that and all things surrounding sex, as uncomfortable as that is, that's what's going on. That's one of the reasons that it's such a bummer, because it's really, really common. It's so much more common than you realize. And it's awesome because we know what's going on, which means we know how to deal with it as well. Now, that might show up differently for each person because we're all on our own unique path, but there are so many tools for recovery nowadays to actually change the brain, the behaviors, and all of the things that go along with that. A quick internet search is going to give you 1,000 tools, or if you want a quick way to learn more about sex addiction and how to holistically recover from it and gain total freedom, you can head to jacedowney.com or check out any of the links in the description below. I know this is weird. I know it's uncomfortable. I know it can be gross and scary and dark, but it is a real thing, and there are real solutions for it. If you're needing one, I hope you find the one that's right for you. Whether you know it or not, you are loved, you deserve an amazing life, and you have everything you need to get there. I love you a lot, and I'll see you next time. Hello again. I have one of my all-time favorite things to get to offer you, and I'm so excited that I can offer it to you for free. I've taken one of my favorite workshops to give and condensed it down into a mini course that you can take online at your convenience whenever you want. I'm going to be talking about how to go from powerless to empowered, not just with regard to addiction, but life in general. You can get that by clicking on the link below at no cost to you.